Okay, well then let's go, while we're on this deeper subject, and let's talk about the nature of evil. I've been working on a series of videos, and I've been talking to other guests, all the guests that have come on the show so far, about the nature of evil, because I've done this video series on the nature of orcishness and the nature of evil there. So I would be interested to know, from, if you're talking about from an Indian perspective, like its nature of evil, how that's represented in fantasy. How did you choose to represent that? Because I did notice, as I was reading that first chapter and then also these other articles on the Radiant Citadel, that there's this force that could be other things in all the different adventures. I don't have access to those, but this non this kind of natural force, the keening,
Keening gloom. Yeah,
it's a that right here.
Right. It's the massive ethereal cyclone. Correct.
So that seems to be a non-personified threat.
Correct.
To
That's
the
right.
city.
That's right.
And was that a deliberate choice in the face of dealing with the nature of evil in fantasy and things like that?
Yeah, so for instance, Indian mythology makes it very complex, right? Often a rakshasa, right? It's a mythological creature in Hindu and Indian, lore and texts and fiction, and they're often portrayed as evil, but a lot of them are also good, and sometimes side with heroes, and can be defined against other evil rakshasas, and I kind of love that, in that it doesn't paint an entire race as evil or entire group as evil. And in the Radiant Citadel, you'll notice that, like, I really avoided evil, and I said people have different agendas and complexities, and I really leaned heavily on things being good in the Radiant Citadel. I think of it as a fragile utopia, and I set it up for three reasons for that. The first one is, in D&D, almost every city that's been written, there's a thieves guild. You could get mugged. There's like monsters lurking under the sewers. There's 20 problems, right? That's been done a lot of times, and I love the cities that have been built out that way. There's some really great and a lot of flavor, but it's been done a lot. And D&D has got 50 years of that, and I didn't want to necessarily contribute or repeat. I didn't want to be repetitive and kind of repeat the same things. So I thought about it, and it was like, what would be a great home base? How do you make something that is, between adventures, and you just want to come back and have good role play? There are three core pillars that Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins talk about D&D, and combat's one of them, but the other two are exploration and social role play. And those are not as often explored, but the Radiant Citadel gives you opportunities to explore, but to play with both of those pillars. So the first one is you think of it in a video game, right? You're the home base in the video game, or the place where you restore, then you go out on an adventure. In many ways, the Radiant Citadel is that. The second is the concept of, it's a fragile utopia that takes work to maintain. It is not it's just not going to be automatically going well. And I wrote hints of that. I didn't go deep into it because I have a limited, space in the book to write about this. And so I'm not going to, and I think people get bored with, hundreds of pages of lore, at least I do. And so I hinted that it takes work to keep this society going. And hopefully a good DM will play with that and have the PCs get involved in the political drama and the social drama in the city. It is a struggle, and it does take work to keep the society at the Radiant Citadel functioning and positive for everybody. That this utopia isn't taken for granted, and I think it's timely in that, we look at our country, or we look at our world, and often people take it for granted that everything is just going to continue to function okay. And I want to make the argument that we have to be part of society, and we have to be an active part of society to continue have a great country and a great world, and that we need to work collaboratively with each other to do so. I think the final thing is, and if you really want a big bad out there, right, is it's a utopia worth fighting for. So if you want to have the evil armies, like a lich or like a chromatic dragon come out and attack it, then you hopefully players will love this place so much when the DM throws like a big existential threat, whether it's a non-evil threat, like the Keen Gloom is more like an environmental threat or a mysterious threat, right? It does not seem to have a mind of its own, or if it does, people don't understand it, right? It's an incomprehensible threat. Or a very comprehensible threat of like, you know, like a half couple like major, you know, chromatic dragons, ancient like a ancient red dragon, or you know, a flight of like blue dragons coming out and attacking it. Hopefully they will love the city enough to say this is worth fighting for, and I want to protect this place because I love being here, and this is my home. And so those are the three different like pillars that I thought about when I built the Radiant Citadel.
All right. Well, where do we go from there? When I was thinking about specifically like the nature of orcishness, we've had this discussion with different people. You know, we have this idea, because I'm just talking through this with myself. We've got this. We're very aware, obviously, in our society and our culture today, that we don't want to act. If we're going to have an evil force in the world, we don't want to accidentally. Well, deliberately, but certainly not deliberately, but not accidentally either. Accidentally say, well, we've just imported a whole bunch of elements from an existing culture in our world. And today, in 2020, we're aware of that.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a lot about what people talk about. But to me, that's also kind of a third order question that, you know, the first order question would be, is there objective evil? And you could talk about that, whether or not you believe that in our world, but you could also talk about that in the context of a fantasy world that you're building. Is there objective evil? Second order question, does that evil manifest, you know, physically? And then if it does, then you've got the third order question about like, well, what kind of physical characteristics should it have, or something like that? Yeah. You know, is it a wraith, or is it an orc, or is it something like that? So you said that in Indian mythology, you don't have, you talked about different things that could be evil, but they might ally with humanity or back and forth and stuff.
Yeah.
Do they have an objective evil that objective? Do they have objective evil, and then do they have it manifest?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I want to be careful about answering that because I think different people have different like perspectives on that. I would say that like certainly. It's not clear cut, right? Ravana, which is you know a Rakshasa lord, and he was very important. Also paid respect to Shiva, one of the good gods, or one of the gods that were, you know, one of the most important gods in Hindu mythology. And he would actually he was a very strong follower of Shiva, and it's wild because he's also like one of the main, you know, villains in Hindu mythology. And so that's a huge contradiction, right? Like this villain is actually paying incredible respect to what is a heroic godlike figure, and that makes it very complex. And I actually find that complexity very interesting. To focus just on D&D worlds, right? Like I think it is interesting to have objectively evil things, but I think that they're most interesting when they're not like humans in general, but more like the actions of human being, you know, maybe trigger that, right? So like I'm not crazy about like an entire race being evil, but I don't mind like an individual going, hey, I am so greedy and so hungry for power and so fearful for death. I will sacrifice anything and everyone for that power. And in that pathway towards this monstrous descent, they turn into a lich. And then a lich is objectively evil, right? Like that individual thing is evil, but that's an individual choice by a humanoid to make consciously that choice, as opposed to like an entire race. I'm also okay with the idea of like deity or demonic figures being quite evil and then getting a following. But I think that following should be a mixed group of people, not like all orcs, but like, you know, like you can have a god of like defilement or something like that, right? And say that god of defilement draws a group of followers for some that speaks to something inside of each of those individual followers that desires it. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's hunger for power. Maybe it's you know, envy. Lots of different things that might make them follow it. And I think that's much more interesting And I think you have a much richer campaign and story than being like, oh, all orcs are just now following this god of defilement, right? What is it? Then you've got like this incredible storytelling, because you kind of end the story when you say like all orcs are evil. It once again is when we talk about flattening characters into one dimensional. This is once again flattening into one dimensional. And you stop asking questions at that point. You're just like, well, they're all evil. That's great. Then I think like a variety of adventures is just like, what? Hey, these like, why is this like God, like, why are these like weird, all of these followers from different like walks of life? You've got a merchant there that's following this god, this evil god, and you've got like a princess that's following this evil god, and you've got like this orc warrior that was once a hero that's now following this evil god, and like what brought them together? I think the story potential blows up when you ask those questions.
Well, that's an interesting way to go. Lou and I talked about evil being something that you do. So that's one potential way to go. You could say that, yes, there is objective evil in the world. And but the way that it manifests is only through actions, and what particular actions people choose to take.
Yeah, I agree with that philosophically. I think that the evil is the actions that you do. That is not that you're inherently evil. I mean, as a person, that's how I think about it. I think in D&D, I think it's okay to have like non-humanoid, races like a demon, right, or a god like figure, or a dragon be evil. I'm okay with that, right? Those are very far from real life things. But once you say like humanoid races becoming pure evil, that becomes a little bit different. I think where I like larger than life entities like gods or demons or whatever being evil is that they are detached. They're almost like forces of nature. It's like if you gave the Keening Gloom, if you did decide it had a mind of its own, then that would be like great. It is this super massive ethereal cyclone is evil, and it's a force of nature, and that's it's almost incomprehensible, and its evil is incomprehensible. And that's a I think that's a viable and potential story element if you want to embrace
that. Yeah, I've been thinking about say, assuming that you do believe in objective evil, which I'm not even sure that I do. Let's just say that you do. It's not my personal philosophy. Let's say that you believe in objective evil. Then something that you wouldn't want to do is to demonize human things. That would be something that would be bad. And so I think in our history of like understanding, for instance, orcishness, the development of orcishness, we've added more and more humanity toward orcs, as we've gone. But if you are a person who believes in evil, then the reverse should also be true. You don't want to humanize the demonic.
Sure.
That would also be something that you wouldn't want to do.
Yeah, I guess if you believe in evil and you think about it that way, you wouldn't want to. Yeah, I think not humanizing it and say that it's some kind of supernatural force is probably a better way to talk about it. And then you can say that people do evil deeds, but it is some kind of external force is an interesting way of looking at it for sure.
I was thinking about this. I haven't mentioned this on camera yet, but I was thinking about this from the Christian perspective, because I'm here in rural Alabama, and I am not the Protestant Christian in my thinking, but my family certainly has been. And so we're talking about growing up with D&D and things like that. I had one of the MERP books, which is the Middle Earth role-playing books, that specifically talked about how the orcs, and that's in the context of Middle Earth. I was talking about the Middle Earth orcs specifically, and it was saying that they worship the darkness. And boy, that was just a huge thing in my
I'm sure.
This book has got to get out of here. This book is evil. We are out of here. And now I've thought about this in two different ways. I've thought that, well, from a Christian perspective, and especially when you think about the book of Revelation, you think about what is Christ's response to evil. It's a combative nature that there is evil. And what is the response to evil? Combative response to evil. And so you could play a game or tell a story where you can say, okay, there is evil. It's those orcs over there. What's the proper response for good people? A combative nature.
Yeah.
And And you could say, look, Dad, but the book, is teaching that story, that this is a story about heroes who are supposed to be combative against nature when they, are evil when they realize it.
Sure.
But that was not something that was recognized. There's so many different layers here because that's not something that was recognized within the household. The presence of that statement that orcs worship darkness means this book has got to get out of here. And that, then I can think, well, gee, would it be worse if we said those orcs, really, they aren't all that evil. They could be really good too. And let's humanize them. Would that be worse in a philosophy when you're talking about, the presence of evil?
So there's an interesting question, because Christianity also says that, all sinners can be redeemed if they repent, right? And if they convert, and I think, in theory, like a community, my thing is always community response. I'm a strong believer in community and collaboration, and I think in the U.S. we've strangely gravitated towards more of this individualism, and that, like, the myth of the individual triumphing against all odds. And nothing about our history actually shows that's really what happened, right? It's communal efforts and large groups of people working together, first to establish their country, then to send out the British, or to lead a revolution against the British, and then continue to build the country. It is communities that do it, and one could argue that, like, a communal effort in the face of evil might actually make evil people change their minds, and maybe they can be. Maybe they will join this community and change their ways. If Christianity is a religion of love, and embraces those themes, I think, one avenue obviously is to fight, but I do think the other avenue is to, like, find ways to get us to a better place. That's just sort of, I'm not Christian. This is sort of my thinking. I mean, I grew up Christian, but I'm not currently. But I just playing a little bit of a, opposing ideas.
I completely. I think that's great, because, like I said, I'm not a Christian either, but I grew up in that kind of thinking. But the thing that I would say there, that to counter that, though, is to say that there would be a difference, especially when I'm thinking about my father was an Anglican priest and my grandfather is a Southern Baptist minister, and they would definitely draw a distinction between a human, that you could talk back like you're talking about, but then also from Lucifer and his demons, that you're not trying to, that there is no hope of redeeming that demon. And so when you encounter that demon, you're encountering evil, and the appropriate thing is to fight. And if you're saying that, then you have to ask for your world. Is the orc representing some type of human, but also the derivation of the word orc comes from demon. So you could just say the orc, you're talking about a demon.
And I guess if it's you're just actually talking about a demon, that would make sense. I think a lot of portrayals of orcs have had implications that they are, it feels like it is, non-white races that are adversarial to Western European races, and that does feel like it is an analogy for Western European conquering or overthrowing of non-white races. And it does go back to the history of how non-white races are often portrayed in white media. They flattened out one, to one-dimensional, the big thug, or the villain who's going to steal, like, a woman, or whatever that portrayal is. And there's a lot of ugly portrayals over the years. I would say there's a strong argument that, like, orcs can fit into that. And so it just depends, I guess, on how you look what you're portraying there.
If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and all of that jazz. It really helps a lot. But also, please check out The Cultists, the web series on this channel about modern-day D&D playing Lovecraftian cultists who just want to worship Cthulhu in a world full of people who just don't understand. Season 1 is on the channel now. But also, please check out my YouTube channel. I have over 150 videos on tabletop games and the fantasy genre. If you've enjoyed this video, you might enjoy many of them as well. I look forward to seeing you for them and many more videos to come.